Our first episode of the Managing Uncertainty podcast was posted on November 3rd, 2016. The title was Shouldn't We Have a Plan for an Alien Invasion? Since then, we've done 149 additional episodes. Welcome to the 150th episode of the Managing Uncertainty podcast. You know me, I'm Bryan Strawser, Principal and Chief Executive here at Bryghtpath. And in this episode, number 150, I'd like to reflect on 6 years of podcasting here at Managing Uncertainty. When I first started podcasting was actually in 2006. I was podcasting and blogging under a pseudonym, something I did for a number of years because my employer at the time didn't care much for podcasting and blogging and things because I had difficulty really kind of understanding that. It wasn't as well known even back in 2006. One of the things I learned pretty quickly in 2006 is that podcasting involved more than just talking into a microphone. In fact, my first episode I recorded, I got some really critical feedback on back in 2006 that it was really difficult to hear me and I was way too soft. So we bought a stack of professional equipment. Now that was really hard back in the day because you had to buy from basically professional audio companies. I had like half a rack, a small desktop rack, 4 or 5 kind of slots of equipment in order to get good sound. So it was a lot harder back then. Today, I'm sitting at my desk at our office in front of a Mac computer. I've got a microphone hooked into a USB audio interface, and everything else is being done by the computer and by the software. I don't have to have all of this other equipment to get to good sound. As I said, we launched this podcast, Managing Uncertainty, back in 2016, and this is episode 150. So what are some of the things that we've learned along the way? Some things I've learned along the way. First is that I have always viewed podcasting as the start of a conversation. Podcasting is not directly a two-way medium unless you're co-hosting or you're interviewing someone and you're or somebody, a group of people, and you're kind of working through that. But we've seen a number of examples where we've started the conversation on the podcast and it's continued on to our Facebook page, onto Twitter, onto other social media. And that is a great way of it kind of engaging in the topic and having a good back and forth. I find podcasting to be an efficient way to talk about the issues of the day. While I enjoy writing in blogging or writing articles in this case, I enjoy it a lot. But this is a lot easier for me to do, to write out some notes and then kind of speak to those notes, just like I'm doing right now. The podcast for us has, as a company, and for me personally, it's been a way for us to establish and build our authority and credibility for the work that we do. It's shocking to me that a number of our clients and our employees started their journey with Bryghtpath by listening to some episodes, and through listening to those episodes, deciding that they wanted to work with us, either as a client or as an employee. And that's something I never could have predicted in 2016. I find that simultaneously the greatest compliment and the scariest comment at the same time. Like, oh my God, you people are really listening. On the podcast, we've talked about a number of topics. We've talked about business continuity. We've talked about crisis management. We've talked about workplace violence, threat management, active shooter and assailant. We've talked about planning for major events. We've talked about crises of the day. We've talked about threats and risks and intelligence issues and ransomware and cybersecurity and more and more and more. And we're going to continue to talk about those topics. Often our episode ideas have come from what we encounter day to day in the work that we do here at Bryghtpath. They come from points we've made in conversations with clients. They come from things we've observed, challenges that we've come across, realizations about strategy, and some of our own learnings as individual leaders and subject matter experts within the team. Podcasting for us has been a way, for me in particular, of combining professional thought and strategy with personal storytelling, and being able to talk about the things that we see and the lessons that we've learned from those observations. In many ways, doing the podcast and then continuing that conversation on social media or in our private Facebook group for resilience professionals has enabled us to build a bit of a sense of community around this space, particularly during COVID, during the pandemic, which of course we're still in the pandemic. But when you can't get together in person and you haven't been able to go to conferences, or it's been more challenging to do those things, this has helped kind of continue to formulate those professional conversations that we all have. In this way, I think that my favorite episodes have been the two that we've done just in the past 2 years, where we've talked about mental health in business continuity and crisis management, and the impact that the pandemic has had on that. I talked about the need for all of us to take care of each other. I've talked about the fact that we've all lost people to mental illness during our lifetimes, and that there's a great stigma and reluctance to talk about those things in our profession, but in society as a whole. We don't like to talk about that. We tend to sweep it under the rug. We don't like to make people uncomfortable by talking about those things. But those two episodes that we did have generated the most number of phone calls and emails and social media discussions than anything else that we've done, even when we've been what I would say is more controversial on some other topics or taken a contrarian view to most of the industry. These two are the episodes, I should say, that clearly resonated with folks. And they still are ones that I reflect on every day as I look at the challenges facing our industry. So there's a few reflections from me on the 6 years of managing uncertainty. I hope that you've enjoyed the podcast along the way, and I look forward to many more years of conversations about the topics in our podcast. As always, I'd love to continue the conversation in our free Facebook group for resilience professionals. You can learn about that in the show notes. That's it for this edition of the Managing Uncertainty podcast, episode 150. We'll have another new episode next week, and we'll continue this journey together. Be well.